Hi, I'm Camille Prescott. The company was my pitch, my plan, my name on every patent. And one morning my mother sent a text. Expect a call from our lawyer. No hello, no warning. Just silence, and Tessa was copied. As always, they didn't fire me. They erased me. I didn't shout, I didn't post. I sold my 51% in silence. And while they toasted their power, I froze their accounts uncovered. The fake vendors followed the 2.7 million they tried to hide offshore and watched the boardroom burn. They thought I left quietly, but I took something they never saw coming, and I wasn't done. The phone buzzed once on the nightstand, sharp against the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. I didn't rush to check it. Mornings in Santa Fe moved slow, like the light through my bedroom curtains, soft, patient. I stretched, then reached for the mug I always left on the bedside table the night before, already half filled with yesterday's coffee. Cold but familiar. I took a sip, leaned back against the headboard, and finally glanced at the screen. One message. Expect a call from our lawyer. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. My mother, Lorraine Prescott. There was a second name copied on the message, Tessa. Of course. My half-sister, my COO, my mother's shadow in designer heels. I sat up, heart ticking, not with fear, but recognition. The kind of recognition that crawls up your spine when you realize the things you've suspected for months weren't paranoia. They were prelude. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stared across the room. My office was just off the kitchen's spare minimal. A glass desk, a single bookshelf, and on the wall the first product schematic I'd ever sketched for Brightcap Ventures. I used to joke that my whole career had been built on napkins and willpower. Now it looked like all of it was about to be erased by a single text. I stood slowly, mug still in hand, and walked to my desk. The sunlight from the window hit the brass nameplate like a spotlight. Camille Prescott, founder and CEO. My name. My title. My company. 3 months ago, I'd drawn up a contingency plan. A manila envelope now sat in the second drawer, sealed edges slightly bent from how often I'd opened it, stared, then tucked it away again. It contained the full agreement to sell my 51% stake in Brightcap to Donovan Strategic Acquisitions. No press, no conditions. Just a clean exit. At the time, I didn't sign it. I told myself it was premature. That things might get better. That maybe, just maybe, they'd stop treating me like an inconvenient piece of old furniture in a room they wanted to redecorate. I placed my mug on the desk, pulled open the drawer, and lifted the envelope. 3 months of hesitation ended the moment I read that message. Lorraine didn't even bother with a lie. No explanation, no softening. Just a clinical warning delivered via text. And the fact that she CC'd Tessa, that was the real message. She always looped in Tessa first. Even before I'd had a chance to breathe, Tessa knew where the power was shifting. That was the pattern. I built. Tessa benefited. Lorraine orchestrated. I ran my fingers over the envelope and then glanced at the wall. The framed photo of our ribbon-cutting ceremony 10 years ago stared back at me. In it, I stood between Lorraine and Tessa, holding the oversized scissors, trying not to grimace while they smiled for the cameras. It had felt fake even then. I remembered the day I first pitched Brightcap to investors. I was 29, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big, and speaking a mile a minute because I couldn't afford to slow down. No one believed in the model. No one except me. And eventually, reluctantly, my mother, who wrote the first check when my father passed. Said she wanted to help with structure. Said she trusted my vision. But structure in her world meant control. Tessa came on later. Fresh out of Wharton, full of ideas she'd never tested. Lorraine asked me to let her shadow me for a while. I did. She shadowed me until I couldn't see my own reflection anymore. I sat down at the desk. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I unlocked my phone and read the message again. Expect a call from our lawyer. I stared at those words until they stopped meaning anything. Then I checked the timestamp. 6:17 in the morning. Deliberate. Cold. Early enough to ruin the day. I didn't respond. Not to Lorraine. Not to Tessa. Instead, I opened my email and pulled up the unsigned PDF of the agreement I drafted with Donovan. Clean terms. Above market valuation. Full divestment, no non-compete. I glanced at the time, 6:45 in the morning. I had until noon to decide if I'd sign and drop it off myself in New York. Outside, the desert sky was turning from charcoal to rust. Another cloudless day in a city where clarity never meant safety. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment. Inhale, exhale. And then I reached into the drawer, took out a pen, and placed it next to the envelope. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just done waiting to be treated like a guest in the house I built. I arrived at Donovan's Strategic Acquisitions just after 11. Their office sat on the 28th floor of a sandstone glass tower tucked into the quieter end of Midtown. No company name on the building. Just polished steel doors and a discreet directory inside. That was Donovan's way. Quiet money. Quiet power. Eleanor Langley met me in the reception area. She wore a navy blazer, no jewelry, no small talk. Just a steady hand and the calm demeanor of someone who'd watched 1,000 empires change hands before breakfast. She extended her hand. Camille. You made good time. I nodded. No traffic out of LaGuardia. She led me down a narrow hallway into a conference room with no windows, just a long table, 2 chairs, and a carafe of water untouched at the center. A closed deal didn't require an audience. We sat. I pulled the manila envelope from my tote bag, laid it flat on the table, and slid it across. 51%, I said. Voting control, founder stake, no caveats. Execute upon signature. Eleanor didn't reach for it right away. She watched me for a moment like she was trying to read beneath the posture and the calm. They know. Not yet, I replied. She gave a subtle nod of approval, then opened the envelope and flipped through the pages. Her eyes moved fast but thoroughly trained. Everything appears to be in order. Once I sign, the wire transfer will initiate within 24 hours. We'll update the registrar before close of business tomorrow. I leaned back in the chair. That's fine. You're sure about this? That question always came. Even when everything was in motion, even when the ink was one stroke away from permanence, someone still asked, Are you sure I am? She picked up the pen, signed with swift, practiced precision, then slid the folder toward me again. I lifted the pen, paused for half a breath, then signed. The sound of the pen against paper was softer than I expected. No bang, no crack, just the whisper of a door closing. Eleanor closed the folder. Congratulations. I didn't answer. We stood. She extended her hand again, this time more gently. Camille, whatever happens next, you walked in here on your own terms. That's the only way I ever walked anywhere. Outside, the sky had turned the color of nickel. I took the elevator down alone, stepped onto the street, and inhaled the heavy Manhattan air. I didn't cry. I didn't take a cab. I walked 6 blocks to the garage, got into my rental car, and started the drive back to Santa Fe. The road unfolded like a long exhale. My phone sat face down in the passenger seat. I didn't check it. I didn't want to know if Lorraine had tried calling or if Tessa had left one of her chipper voicemails pretending she hadn't known a thing. The miles passed in a blur of asphalt and scrubland. Somewhere in New Mexico, the sky opened wide again, deep and gold. I rolled down the window, let the wind tangle my hair. The quiet felt earned. It was sometime after dusk when my mind wandered to that night 2 years ago. Tessa had just landed her first solo deal, a partnership with a mid-sized accelerator in Seattle. She was glowing. Everyone at the rooftop party toasted her, even Lorraine, who usually kept her praise rationed like wartime sugar. I had stood at the bar, sipping ginger beer, watching the whole thing like I was the ghost of the founder instead of the actual one. Tessa had joined me briefly. Her dress was emerald green, her smile too bright for how many martinis she'd had. She leaned and whispered over the rim of her glass. If this place ever goes down, I've got an exit plan. I remember blinking confused. I laughed a little because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I don't need one, I said. She shrugged. That's brave. Or naive. I hadn't thought of that night since. But now, on this stretch of highway with nothing but dusk and silence around me, her voice echoed sharper than it had in the moment. It hadn't been a joke. It had been a warning. And I'd missed it. Back then, I still believed in things like loyalty. In the idea that being first meant something. That blood meant bond. That if I worked hard enough, stayed calm enough, gave enough room for everyone else to shine, they'd never turn the lights off on me. But they had. And that exit plan Tessa bragged about, I had a feeling I was going to find out exactly what it looked like soon enough. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the stars were out. My porch light blinked on automatically. The silence of the desert greeted me like a familiar friend. Inside, I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and poured myself a glass of water. Then I sat at the kitchen table, folded my hands, and stared out the window at the dark horizon. They didn't see me coming. And that more than anything gave me peace. The porch light flickered once when I stepped inside, as if unsure whether to stay lit or give in to the dark. I tossed my keys into the bowl by the door and stood there for a moment still. The silence wrapped around me, familiar but different. Not emptiness, clarity. It was the kind of silence that only came after a decision too long delayed had finally been made. I peeled off my coat, poured a glass of water I wouldn't finish, and sat on the edge of the couch. My phone vibrated against the table. One buzz, then another. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, New York area code. I let it ring through. A minute later it vibrated again. This time a text, FYI attempted transfer blocked, $2.7 million. Recipient Synergy Bridge Holdings, Delaware. Transfer originated internally. More to follow. Donovan Legal. The glass in my hand slipped slightly, water sloshing over the rim. I didn't move. I read the message again and again until the words pressed into the back of my eyes. Synergy Bridge Holdings. I'd seen that name once. A fleeting moment during a vendor audit I hadn't been invited to, tucked inside a spreadsheet marked vendor simplification. I'd asked about it in passing. Tessa told me it was part of a new outreach initiative. Lorraine had waved it off like it was beneath my level. I should have pushed harder. I stood, grabbed my laptop, and opened the secure Donovan client portal. The incident was already logged, transfer amount timestamp 1:12 in the morning. Eastern. Origin Brightcap, internal server verified through encrypted VPN. The request had been flagged automatically thanks to the transaction freeze clause we'd built into the sale. A clause I'd insisted on. I opened the file attached to the alert. The authorization ID matched Tessa's. The request had gone out less than 12 hours after I signed the transfer of ownership. They weren't wasting time. I refreshed my email. A new message arrived at 2:07 in the morning. Camille, we're looking deeper. Multiple transfers over past fiscal year match the same pattern. All routed through shell vendors. We'll confirm source and approval chain within hours. I didn't need to wait for confirmation. I already knew. Still, I kept reading, eyes skimming lines of code and authorization logs. Words blurred into numbers. Dates. Vendor codes. Routing numbers. Each line like a fingerprint left behind by someone who never expected anyone to look this closely. I made a pot of coffee at 3 o'clock in the morning, drank it black. The bitterness cut through the weight pressing behind my eyes. I didn't sleep. I didn't want to. I needed to stay in the tension. To feel the heat of what they'd done. By 6:30 in the morning, Eleanor called. I answered on the first ring. Camille, we've confirmed 5 separate entities, all structured similarly to Synergy. Total transfers estimated at $4.3 million. The pattern spans roughly 14 months. All approved under Lorraine's admin credentials. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the granite cool beneath my palm. Let me guess, consulting services. Exactly. Same descriptions, similar payment sizes. No deliverables, no reports, no contact logs. And Tessa. There's evidence she directly routed at least 2 of the vendor setups through compliance. One of our analysts traced a shared Dropbox folder that links back to her personal assistant's old email. Of course she used someone else. She never liked fingerprints. Just instructions whispered behind closed doors. I want full copies of everything. Every invoice, every approval, every email. Already compiling. You'll have a secure folder by noon. I hesitated. One more thing. Can you verify internal access? Who had admin-level system clearance in the last 30 days? There was a pause. We pulled that already. Tessa's credentials were used at 12:41 in the morning. This morning to initiate the transfer. IP matches her home in Brooklyn. Blatant. Almost brazen. Thank you, I said, then hung up. The sun hadn't even cleared the mountains yet. I hadn't eaten. My hands trembled not from exhaustion but from fury too quiet to scream. I pulled my phone from the charger and called Ethan. He picked up groggily. Camille, I need your help, I said. Are your Brightcap credentials still active? I think so. They never removed me from the back-end access panel after I left. Why? Because they tried to move money. A lot of it. Under Tessa's name. Shell company in Delaware. And Donovan's team found more. 4 million total. Maybe more. I heard him sit up. Jesus. I need internal email records. Especially anything referencing Synergy Bridge vendor approvals, end-of-quarter restructuring, or compliance overrides. Start with Lorraine and Tessa. I'm on it. And Ethania, download everything and route it through a clean drive. I don't want them knowing what we're pulling yet. You got it. I hung up and stared at the wall for a moment. My fingers hovered over the laptop keyboard, then moved on their own. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Ethan sent over a secure folder with 23 documents. I opened the first thread. Lorraine to Tessa. Subject: final phase, do not delay. If Camille asks questions, deflect to PR metrics. She's already half checked out. Push the Synergy funds through by Friday. Tessa had replied within minutes. Done. Her eyes are on the sale, not on us. I kept reading. Each email another needle beneath the skin. Instructions, diversions, strategies to keep me preoccupied while they gutted the company from the inside out. At the bottom of the thread, a message from Lorraine sent 2 days before the sale closed. Let's clean this up quietly. If she finds out, it's already too late. I closed the laptop and sat back, heartbeat steady now. Not from calm but from direction. They thought they were done with me, but I wasn't done with them. The morning light crept in through the blinds, casting pale lines across the living room floor. I hadn't moved from the couch in over an hour. The documents were still open on my laptop, the emails still burned into my eyes, but I wasn't looking at them anymore. My mind had drifted to a different kind of ledger, one written not in numbers but in memories. I rose slowly, walked past the kitchen and into the small study down the hall. The air in there always smelled like cedar and old paper. I hadn't opened the bottom cabinet in years, not since the day I packed away the last of my father's personal things, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. The wooden box was still there, nestled between 2 faded manila folders and a stack of outdated tax returns. The lid was scuffed, the hinges a little stiff, but it opened with a soft click. Inside, everything was just as I remembered. A fountain pen with a cracked cap. A photo of me and my dad standing outside the first Brightcap warehouse, both of us in hoodies and work boots, faces flushed from cold and pride. And beneath that, sealed in a plastic sleeve, an envelope with my name written in his handwriting, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. I sat on the floor and peeled the sleeve open. The letter inside was dated 7 months before his stroke. Camille. If you're reading this, it means things have taken a turn I hoped they wouldn't. I always believed in your instincts. I also knew how much your mother valued structure, order, control, and how much Tessa would want her own name in lights. I saw it coming long before you did. This company only exists because of your grit, your vision. If they try to write you out, this document restores what should never have been taken. I've left 10% of my shares in your name. Enclosed is a notarized statement to that effect, and Malcolm has the originals in trust. You'll know when it's time. Don't let them tell the story without you. Love always, Dad. My breath caught in my throat. I'd forgotten the way his voice sounded when he wrote. Measured. Firm. Protective. Beneath the letter was a folded legal document signed, notarized, and stamped with the seal of the state of New Mexico. The name Harold Prescott appeared at the top. At the bottom, next to the small official seal, was mine. I blinked, then reached for my phone. Malcolm Foster answered on the second ring. Camille, he said warmly as if no time had passed. I found it, I told him. The letter. The documents. The 10%. There was a pause, the kind that held more weight than silence. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said. Harold always believed this day would come. He gave me strict instructions: hold the original documents until you reached out. Or until they tried to remove you. They already have. Then the documents are yours officially and without contest. I'll messenger them to your address today, but I suggest we meet in person. This could shift the entire legal standing. Do they know you're still holding them? Lorraine requested copies years ago. I declined. She was not pleased. I bet. Camille, your father trusted you. Not the title, not the company you. That matters. I thanked him and we agreed to meet in Santa Fe the next morning. When I hung up, I stared down at the paper in my hand. My name. My father's signature. The final stroke of truth he left behind. It didn't just restore my ownership. It restored my position as founder. Not in the PR sense, not in some ceremonial way. Legally. Irrevocably. I tucked the letter back into its sleeve and placed it carefully on my desk. The war they thought they'd already won was far from over. Later that day, I took a long walk through the arroyo behind my house. The trail was dry, sun-bleached, lined with chamisa and juniper. I let the heat sting my skin, let the wind pull my thoughts into order. I thought about the years I spent building Brightcap from scratch. The pitch meetings that went nowhere. The prototype failures. The nights I fell asleep on warehouse floors. Lorraine had come in only when the investor interest became real. And Tessa had been handed a role she never earned, all because she played the game better than I did. She smiled more. Questioned less. And now they were trying to strip me of not just ownership but origin. As if I had been a placeholder in my own story. Not anymore. When I returned home, the air in the house felt different. Lighter somehow. I poured a glass of wine, sat at my desk, and opened a new document on my laptop. Not a plan. Not a lawsuit. Just a title. Reclamation. I saved it. Closed the screen. Tomorrow I'd meet Malcolm. Tonight I would let myself breathe. The knock came just after 10. Not loud, not rushed. Just steady enough to be intentional. I opened the door and found Ethan standing there, hands in the pockets of his jacket, his eyes a little tired, like he'd been running through something in his head on repeat. I almost didn't come, he said quietly. I stepped aside without answering, let him in, and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. Just stood in the middle of the living room like he didn't know whether he was welcome or just tolerated. I have to tell you something, he said. I folded my arms. Then tell me. He nodded, exhaled. A deep one. The kind you take before jumping into something you can't undo. When I first joined Brightcap, it wasn't random. Lorraine recruited me out of Stanford. I had just finished my clerkship and she said she needed someone sharp in-house, someone who could navigate the legal side quietly. Discreetly. I remember this part, I said. You told me you joined the compliance team. I just didn't know who put you there. He swallowed. She didn't want a lawyer. She wanted a watcher. Someone to keep tabs. Someone close to you. The words didn't hit all at once. They layered themselves like sediment, slowly pressing into something that was already cracking. So you spied on me, number. Not at first. I reported back on paperwork, policies, hiring decisions, nothing personal. But then I met you, and it shifted. I stopped passing things along. I started deleting her requests. You should have told me the moment we started dating. I know. I walked away from him, my arms still crossed, but tighter now. My fingers dug into my elbows like I could anchor myself in something solid. How long? He hesitated. A little too long. 6 months. Maybe closer to 7. I turned full of heat. So while I was pulling 18-hour days trying to keep that company above water, you were writing memos to my mother about how often I blinked. It wasn't like that. It never is, Ethan. He stepped forward, stopped himself, then slowly reached into his bag. I know I can't fix this, and if you want me gone after tonight, I'll leave. But before you decide, you need to see this. He handed me a flash drive and a thick envelope, the kind that looked too clean to be accidental. What is it? He stepped back, voice lower now. Proof. I took the envelope, opened it. Inside were printed emails, spreadsheets, wire receipts. I recognized some of the names, vendors we were supposedly using for outreach, alignment, and executive strategy, terms vague enough to mean anything. Ethan spoke again, quieter. I've been tracking them since April. I knew Lorraine and Tessa were rerouting funds, but I couldn't tie it together until last week. When the synergy transfer hit, I started cross-referencing metadata, VPN usage, and authorization logs. This is everything I've got. I said nothing. There's more, he added. I pulled it because I thought you might need leverage. You're not the only one they're trying to erase. He pulled up his phone, tapped twice, then showed me an email thread. Subject line: brand realignment. Sent from Tessa to our former PR director. Phase the 1st of September. Erase Camille's public identity from Brightcap's forward vision. Limit legacy references. Position her as visionary origin, not a leadership architect. Phase 2. Shift all founder messaging to Lorraine plus new leadership language. I stared at the words. My jaw tightened. They were rewriting me out of my own company. Not just in the boardroom. In headlines. In history. I walked slowly to the window, let the cool night air press against the glass as I looked out over the dark ridgeline. My reflection hovered faintly in the pane, tired, taut, but unbroken. When I turned back, Ethan was still standing where I left him, not trying to get closer. I should have told you sooner, he said, but I didn't want to lose you. I wanted to throw something. Yell. Collapse. But instead I walked past him and sat at the dining table, spreading the papers out like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized was being solved behind my back. For a long time neither of us spoke. Eventually I looked up. You stayed anyway. Yeah. Why? Because I stopped working for her the moment I realized she never intended to let you lead. She wanted your credibility, not your command. And what about you? He met my eyes. I wanted both. I leaned back in my chair, fingers brushing over the email printouts, the spreadsheets, the evidence. I still didn't trust him. Not fully, not yet. But looking at everything in front of me, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't fight this alone, and now I didn't have to. The wind had picked up by dawn, rattling the windows gently like the house was trying to wake me. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night at the kitchen table surrounded by folders, flash drives, and loose sheets of printed emails all spread out like a battlefield map. Ethan had gone upstairs hours ago, giving me space. I hadn't asked him to stay. He just did. I was halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee when I opened my old mentoring inbox on a whim. It wasn't tied to Brightcap, just a simple Gmail I used to reply to young founders who reached out after panels, talks, or those late-night LinkedIn messages that always started with "sorry to bother you." Buried near the bottom was a 2-year-old thread. Subject line: advice for a first-time founder. Her name was Ariana Phelps, 26 at the time. She'd built a small ed-tech prototype out of a college research grant and was trying to raise a pre-seed round without getting buried under co-founder drama or diluted by greedy angel investors. Her message had been raw and direct. I've seen what happens when women lose control of their own companies. I don't want to end up like that. How do I protect myself? I remembered that email. Remembered reading it on a red-eye flight from LAX after a pitch competition where a male panelist had praised my poise but questioned whether I was built for scale. My reply had been short and deliberate. Get everything in writing. Keep hard copies of your original founding documents. Lock your name into the IP and legal frameworks from day one. And never ever give away voting control even to someone you love. Now, 2 years later, I sat at my table with a folder full of evidence proving just how far my own family had gone to erase me from a company I built. My own words stared back at me from that old thread, as if mocking the distance between who I was then and who I'd become. I hit reply and typed, "You were right to be cautious. I wish I'd listened to myself as closely as you listened to me. Still fighting, still standing. And grateful for the reminder." I didn't expect a response. But sending it felt like reclaiming something. Not just my advice, but my voice. Just as I closed the tab, Ethan walked in holding a USB drive and a fresh printout. The server logs are still open. Either no one noticed I still have access, or they're too distracted trying to cover their own tracks. He handed me the drive and the papers. The new files included a buried thread between Tessa and our former PR head's subject line, Legacy Shift. Phase 1. Begin repositioning Lorraine as the stabilizing visionary behind Brightcap. Phase 2. Reframe Camille as foundational but non-essential. Emphasize her early role as idealistic and short-term. Phase 3. Sunset all external references to Camille by end of quarter. I didn't flinch. I'd already known they were doing it. But seeing it written out so clearly felt like being slowly erased with a smile. Behind me, Malcolm cleared his throat. He'd arrived 30 minutes earlier, suitcase in hand, and had been reviewing every document we'd compiled. This, he said, tapping the last page, is premeditated identity theft. Not in the criminal sense, but in the legal architecture of business storytelling. They're not just stealing money, they're stealing authorship. I nodded. Let's take it back. We spent the next 2 hours assembling the full legal motion confirmation of my 10% stake from Harold's sealed documents, internal emails proving my removal was orchestrated well before the sale, metadata logs showing the timing of wire transfers to shell companies, and the PR plan designed to scrub my name from the company's public narrative. Malcolm would file it through Donovan Strategic's legal channels. Eleanor had already confirmed a 9 a.m. board meeting for Friday designated as an emergency governance review. I drafted a formal appearance notice and added Lorraine and Tessa directly to the recipient list. No cover message. Just the document signed and time-stamped. Ethan looked over my shoulder as I hit send. That's going to rattle them, he said. Good. Let them know I'm not gone. I was never gone. We paused for a late lunch, barely touched, and sat mostly in silence. My nerves weren't jittery anymore. Just focused. Like standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of but had to jump into anyway. As I cleared the dishes, my phone buzzed with a new message. Subject. Still fighting too. You once told me to protect what I built. Thank you. It was from Ariana. I stood there, phone in hand, heart unexpectedly full. The people I helped were still out there, still building, still protecting themselves with the tools I'd handed them when I still believed I had power. And maybe I'd lost track of it for a while. Maybe I'd let too much go in the name of peace, family, compromise. But not anymore. Not with Ethan beside me, not with Malcolm in my corner. Not with proof in my hand and my name still inked on the original charter. I wasn't just fighting for myself now. I was fighting for every founder who'd been written out of their own legacy. By the time the sun dipped low over the hills, the documents were signed, the motion was queued for filing, and the board had been served. I poured a glass of water, sat on the porch, and watched the horizon stretch wide and wild. Friday would come soon enough. And this time I'd have a seat at the table. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime onto the 38th floor of the Brightcap headquarters in Manhattan. I stepped out alone, heels quiet against the polished concrete, and walked down the long corridor lined with framed press articles and investor awards, most of them featuring my name, though fewer than there should have been. At the end of the hallway stood the boardroom. Glass walls, heavy wood doors, and a panoramic view of the East River beyond. I'd sat at that table 100 times, usually at the far end, quietly fixing the things no one else wanted to touch. Today I walked in first. The room was already half full. Donovan's team stood near the head of the table. Eleanor Langley included, clipboard in hand, calm as ever. A few board members gave me tight nods. Others looked away, already uneasy. Then the door opened behind me. Lorraine entered first, her signature black blazer, perfectly pressed lips set in a line so firm it could have sliced glass. Tessa followed a step behind, dressed in a sleeveless blouse too sharp for morning. Her eyes met mine for a single moment before dropping to the floor. They hadn't expected me. They thought they'd cleared the last piece off the board. Eleanor spoke first, voice neutral and clipped. Let the record reflect that this emergency governance review was called by Donovan Strategic Acquisitions in accordance with Section 8.7 of the Oversight Clause. Present are Camille Prescott, former CEO and current equity holder, Lorraine Prescott board chair, Tessa Vaughn chief operating officer, and the full independent board. There were no greetings. No opening jokes. Just a tension that pressed down on the room like high humidity. Eleanor stepped aside and the lead counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana Calhoun, clicked the remote. The first slide lit up the screen. It started simple. A timeline of transactions, 14 months, 5 LLCs, over $4.3 million in payments categorized as consulting strategy and executive retreats. The next slide showed the breakdown. Synergy Bridge Holdings, Evergreen East Consulting, Monarch Path Advisory. All traced back to either Lorraine's or Tessa's personal accounts or to a private trust in Bermuda under a third-party financial firm. Dana kept speaking steady and clear. Each vendor listed here has no employees, no registered office, no service deliverables. Wire transfers show patterns consistent with internal misappropriation of funds and shell routing. She clicked again. Now the images shifted, screenshots of emails, timestamps, IP logs, messages between Tessa and Lorraine discussing how to time transactions so compliance wouldn't flag them. One included a direct quote from Tessa. "Camille won't notice. She's too distracted with the transition and Ethan's exit. We move now." My name on their lips like an afterthought. Like I was a ghost they thought would never return. Next slide. Invoices labeled as Team Wellness Strategy that matched receipts from a Tuscan spa resort Lorraine had visited last spring. Another for a compliance retreat hosted at a private estate in Sonoma, attended by no known employees, but billed under corporate realignment. Someone at the table made a small sound, half scoff, half disbelief. The slide after that showed account routing details. One flagged transaction listed a payment of $870,000 to a Bermuda-based holding account titled Legacy Allocation Fund. Dana paused. This transfer was initiated 3 days after Camille's equity sale. The beneficiary was a trust administered by a foreign advisor known to manage high-net-worth exits. The attached memo, written by Lorraine Prescott, was titled Discrete Liquidation Strategy. Gasps weren't common in boardrooms, but someone let one slip. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Dana clicked to the final slide. An email enlarged on the screen. From Lorraine to a Bernard Creel, dated 2 weeks ago. Subject: contingency planning. The message was brief. We move forward with Plan B. Camille no longer has a foothold. I didn't look at Lorraine. I didn't have to. I could hear her breathing shift faster, more shallow. Tessa, on the other hand, stared down at the table, her knuckles white against the edge of the armrest. Her shoulders were rigid, but her posture was beginning to crumble. She hadn't spoken once. Eleanor stepped forward again. At this time we will enter witness review and formal response. But before that, Miss Prescott, you are acknowledged as founding partner and legal beneficiary of a 10% ownership stake as per Hector rolled Prescott's notarized transfer. My name felt different this time, not a placeholder. A presence. I didn't rise. I didn't gesture. I simply sat there, silent, composed, unblinking, while the mountain of evidence laid bare everything they thought they had hidden. They had written the narrative. But I had brought the receipts. The morning air was brittle with late October chill when I stepped onto my porch. My breath fogged in front of me as I wrapped my sweater tighter around my ribs. The sky was dull gray, like it hadn't made up its mind about rain yet. I hadn't slept much, but it didn't matter. What I felt wasn't exhaustion, it was the quiet thrum of clarity. The kind that came after you stopped hiding. Inside, Ethan was already at the counter, 2 mugs of coffee ready. He didn't say anything when I took one. Just nodded toward the tablet propped open on the breakfast bar. You're going to want to see this. The headline stretched across the homepage of Business Chronicle in bold, immaculate type: Founding Partner Steps Down Amid Leadership Transition. Below it, a smaller subheading: Insiders suggest former CEO Camille Prescott cited exhaustion and a desire for creative distance. My mouth stayed shut, but the grip on my coffee tightened. The article was exactly what I expected: glossy, manufactured, and eerily devoid of truth. It framed me as a fading artist grateful to pass the torch. It even quoted an anonymous board member who praised my visionary input in the early days while applauding Brightcap's new direction under a next-generation leadership lens. Tessa's fingerprints were all over it. "They think this will stick," Ethan muttered. "That a clean, graceful narrative will calm the market." I didn't respond right away. I read the whole thing slowly, even the lines designed to cut soft but deep. I finished the coffee. Then I walked over to my laptop, opened my browser, and logged into LinkedIn. I stared at the blank post window for a long moment. Then I began to type. I didn't step down. I was removed. Quietly. Strategically. Without conversation or consent. I paused, fingers hovering, then continued. But I will not pretend. Not for their comfort. Not for their optics. I will not let legacy be rewritten by those who inherited, not built. I founded Brightcap Ventures with nothing but a borrowed desk and my father's blueprints. I worked every line of code, hired every early employee. I stayed when others doubted. I gave more than anyone asked. And when the company no longer needed my labor, they no longer needed me. But you cannot erase what was built in truth. You cannot delete the nights spent soldering prototypes or chasing first funding at kitchen tables. You cannot erase memory. And you cannot silence truth. I ended with 3 final lines. I am not leaving quietly. I am not ashamed. And I am not alone. I reread the post twice. I didn't add a caption. No dramatic photos, no formal tone, just me. Just facts. Then I hit post. What happened next was slow then fast. The first few likes came from former interns' quiet nods of support. Then came the engineers, the original product team, the vendor coordinator who once shared granola bars with me during a 16-hour hackathon. Comments flooded in stories I hadn't heard in years. She fought for better parental leave when no one else did. Camille approved my hire when HR hesitated. She believed in a product that the board called too niche. It ended up saving us in year 2. By midday, the story had moved beyond me. Former colleagues reposted with their own memories. A UX designer recalled how I sat beside her through a failed launch to help rewrite every line of user flow. A marketing intern wrote about how I gave her a full-time offer before she even graduated. Then Ariana reshared the post. The founder I once mentored added only a few words of her own. She told me to guard what I built. Today, she reminded us how. The momentum grew like a wave. Not manufactured. Not polished. Just real people who remembered who I was before the headlines. By early afternoon, my inbox was full of messages from journalists asking for interviews. Podcasters wanted to schedule talks. Someone from a documentary startup offered to fly out and film. I declined them all for now. Later that day, Donovan's communications lead forwarded me a summary. Brightcap's PR firm had gone into high alert. They were trying to rebalance the narrative and manage sentiment. But it was already too late. This wasn't a scandal, it was a reckoning. The version of me they tried to bury had resurfaced with 1,000 voices behind her. No coordinated campaign, no strategy deck, just the truth spoken plainly. And it turned out people were tired of polished lies. That evening I sat in the garden out back under a string of old porch lights reading message after message until the screen blurred. One from a product lead I hadn't heard from in 3 years simply read, "You are the reason I stayed. Thank you for not going quietly." I leaned back, the stars barely visible through a thin veil of cloud. Somewhere in Manhattan, I imagined Tessa reading through the comments, Lorraine pacing her kitchen silent. They'd tried to control the press. But some things you couldn't spin. Not anymore. Not when the people who were there remembered the truth for themselves, and not when I finally decided to speak. The summons came wrapped in legal civility, but the intent behind it was anything but polite. Filed in the Southern District of New York, the complaint named me as the sole defendant in a defamation suit brought by Lorraine Prescott, citing reputational damage, willful sabotage of corporate trust, and intentional disruption of executive function. I stared at the packet freshly couriered to my doorstep and let the absurdity wash over me. They'd robbed me of my company, scrubbed my name from the narrative, funneled millions into shell accounts, and now they were accusing me of harming their reputation by telling the truth. When I called Malcolm, he wasn't surprised. "It's a preemptive strike," he said. "They're trying to make you look unstable before discovery begins. They want the court of public opinion to lean in their favor before we get to actual court." Ethan paced behind me in the kitchen, phone in hand, already digging into legal databases. I opened the complaint again. Paragraph 14 alleged that my LinkedIn post caused irreparable damage to the company's fundraising efforts. Paragraph 21 implied that my emotional instability during transition planning had made me a liability. Paragraph 33 stated that I'd misrepresented the nature of her exit for personal gain. Personal gain. I nearly laughed. Malcolm scheduled an emergency response filing for Tuesday morning. We would challenge not only the lawsuit itself but file a motion to admit Harold's notarized will as primary evidence of founding intent and equity assignment. "They want this to be about feelings," Malcolm told me. "We'll make it about facts." The weekend crawled by, tensions stretching every hour. Ethan fielded incoming inquiries from press outlets and legal observers. My inbox brimmed with emails, some supportive, others cautious, a few asking me to step back to avoid tarnishing what was still a good brand. But I wasn't protecting a brand, I was defending truth. On Sunday night, an anonymous employee forwarded me an internal email from Tessa to the Brightcap leadership team. The language was sterile but cutting. "Until further notice, no team member is authorized to communicate directly or indirectly with Camille Prescott. All queries are to be routed through legal or the designated transition comms team." At the bottom, it added a soft footnote. "We appreciate your cooperation as we navigate this sensitive moment." Sensitive moment. As if my removal and public smearing were part of some graceful, inevitable handoff. By Tuesday morning, we were in federal court. The courtroom wasn't packed, but the atmosphere was charged. Lorraine sat across the aisle, draped in a deep green jacket, flanked by counsel. Tessa was beside her, typing furiously into her phone, barely looking up. I entered with Malcolm and Ethan. My palms were dry, my back straight. The presiding judge was a woman in her late 60s with piercing gray eyes and a reputation for slicing through theatrics. I'd read her rulings the night before. She didn't suffer nonsense. Lorraine's attorney opened with a solemn tone, portraying me as a disgruntled founder who couldn't accept the natural evolution of leadership. He painted my post as a vindictive attack strategically timed to sabotage an upcoming investor round. He said I had distorted internal affairs, exaggerated my role, and disrupted morale among junior staff. Then Malcolm stood. "Your Honor, we ask to admit into the record the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Prescott, notarized and certified 5 months prior to his passing. In this document, he explicitly names Camille Prescott as co-founder and principal inheritor of Brightcap Ventures' equity and voting rights." The judge accepted it with barely a flicker. "We also submit evidence of coordinated internal communications predating Camille's removal by at least 3 weeks, including strategic directives to erase her from all public and internal references before any formal vote occurred." Malcolm handed over Ethan's compiled packet, metadata stamped emails, internal strategy docs, and a recorded conversation between 2 board members joking about keeping Camille out of the loop until it's too late. The judge read silently for several minutes. The room was quiet, the air tight. Then she spoke. "Given the gravity of this evidence and the implications for internal governance, I am ordering an immediate third-party audit of Brightcap Ventures board procedures, including but not limited to conflict of interest disclosures, asset transfer records, and PR coordination documents." She paused, then looked directly at Lorraine and Tessa. "Furthermore, I am placing a temporary freeze on all personal asset movement involving Miss Lorraine Prescott and Miss Tessa Vaughn, effective immediately, pending review." A rustle went through the room like a sudden wind. Lorraine's jaw clenched. Tessa dropped her phone. Malcolm nodded once, then sat beside me. "You did good," he whispered. I didn't respond. I didn't smile. When the hearing adjourned, I left without speaking to press. Ethan shielded me from cameras. Malcolm answered only with a brief statement. "Our team looks forward to full transparency." Outside the courthouse, I stood still under a slate sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt no need to run ahead, no panic to explain myself. Everything that needed saying was now part of the public record. They had tried to bury me in silence. I'd answered with the law. And now the court would speak louder than any headline ever could. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, the kind that crawled beneath the skin. Every seat was filled, even the corners lined with junior associates and curious reporters. This wasn't just a corporate dispute anymore. This had become a symbol of something larger, of power, legacy, and the quiet ways people like me are written out of their own stories. I sat beside Malcolm, palms resting flat on the cool table, breath steady. Across from me, Lorraine wore a white silk blouse like armor, her posture unyielding. Tessa sat next to her in an uncharacteristically muted blazer, eyes fixed on the polished table surface as if the right reflection might offer an escape route. When the judge entered, the room shifted instantly. Everyone rose, then settled into place. The bailiff called the court to order, and we began. First testimony. The legal back and forth felt procedural at first. Corporate auditors, financial analysts, board members all laid out the mechanics of the fraud, how funds were misclassified, how consulting contracts were fabricated, how offshore trusts had been opened under aliases. Then they called me. I rose slowly and walked to the witness stand. The oath was simple. My voice didn't shake. I spoke of the early days of Harold and the garage workshop, of ramen-fueled planning sessions, of late nights rewriting pitch decks. I spoke of hiring the first 5 employees with my own credit line, of holding investor calls while building prototypes with blistered hands. I told them how Lorraine joined, offering structure that slowly turned into silence. How Tessa shadowed me, then gradually stepped into rooms I'd been locked out of. I told the truth. All of it. Then they called the surprise witness. His name was James Kincaid. He had worked in Lorraine's legal office for 4 years, a quiet man with a clean-cut suit and the nervous energy of someone not used to the spotlight. He looked at the judge, then at me, then back at Lorraine. Camille Prescott didn't just co-found Brightcap, he said. She kept it alive. Every time the firm faced collapse, when Series A fell through, when supply chains froze, she found a way. I watched them strip her out of documents, one line at a time. And I stayed silent. But not anymore. The words landed like stone. Lorraine didn't move. Tessa turned her head away, jaw set. The judge nodded once and dismissed him. Then she asked if either side had additional material. Malcolm stood. We rest, Your Honor. So did Lorraine's team. The judge took a long pause, then signaled for the clerk. She flipped through the file in front of her. The room held its breath. This court, she said, finds that Camille Prescott is to be legally reinstated as co-founder of Brightcap Ventures. My hands stayed folded, but my heart pressed hard against my ribs. The judge continued. The will of Harold Prescott is hereby validated and enforced. Camille Prescott's 10% equity stake is to be restored retroactive to the original date of transfer. Any revenue withheld during that time must be reconciled within 30 days. I closed my eyes for one breath. The ruling went on. Further, this court finds that Lorraine Prescott and Tessa Vaughn did knowingly engage in coordinated financial misconduct, including unauthorized asset transfers and fraudulent reporting. As such, their personal assets will be subject to restitution in the amount of $2,700,000. Gasps filled the room now. Real ones. Not even subtle. The judge wasn't finished. Effective immediately, Lorraine Prescott and Tessa Vaughn are barred from holding any executive or financial decision-making positions in any registered investment firm or capital venture entity within the United States. I didn't look at them, not out of spite, just because I didn't need to anymore. The gavel came down like punctuation. Court adjourned. People stood, some slow, some stunned. Reporters whispered into phones. I rose quietly, my chair legs barely making a sound. Outside, the courthouse cameras swarmed, but I didn't stop. I kept walking one step after another toward the waiting car. Inside, Ethan turned from the front seat, eyes wide. That's it, he asked, breathless. It's done, not done, I said. But finally named. He didn't reply. He just reached over and took my hand as the driver pulled away from the curb. The city moved past the window in slow blurs, but I didn't really see it. I was thinking about a desk in a garage, about the first soldered wire that connected two broken pieces of something that wasn't supposed to work but did. And now so had I. The old warehouse looked smaller than I remembered. Set on the edge of a quiet industrial block in East Austin, its brick facade was weather-worn the red, now a dull russet chipped at the corners where vines had begun to claim the walls. The steel roll-up door groaned when I pulled it halfway open, dust scattering like ash into the sunbeams that filtered through the high windows. I hadn't been back in years. Not since my father passed. Not since we boxed up our prototypes and moved operations into sleek glass offices and pitch-perfect boardrooms. But this was where it started. I stepped inside, the familiar echo of my own footsteps greeting me. My boots stirred a layer of dust across the concrete floor, but beneath it I could still see faint outlines drawn in thick black marker boxes, arrows, notes in my father's sharp handwriting. This was our first blueprint. A map of funding flows scribbled onto the wall in permanent ink because we couldn't afford whiteboards back then. Just concrete willpower and late-night coffee. I walked along the wall slowly, fingers grazing the uneven texture. This was the place where Harold Prescott first showed me how a line of code could change someone's access to capital. Where we soldered motherboards on folding tables and built demo decks under flickering lights. The startup kits felt primitive now, wires held in place with painter's tape, a repurposed UPS battery for backup, but at the time it had been everything. A soft knock echoed from the open door behind me. I turned. Ariana stood there in jeans and a windbreaker, her hair tied up, a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. She hesitated just inside the threshold, taking in the space. "Is this it?" she asked quietly. I nodded and reached into my coat pocket, pulling out the small ring of keys I had carried in the bottom of my drawer for years. I held them out to her, the rusted brass glinting in the light. "It's yours now. Just remember, it's not a museum. It's a launch pad." Her fingers closed around the keys slowly, reverently. "Camille, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just build something worth fighting for." We stood there for a moment, the quiet stretching between us like a thread that spanned generations of women daring to stay in the rooms they'd been asked to leave. She walked forward, her boots making that same soft echo as mine had. "I remember what you said," Ariana whispered. "About keeping everything in your own name. Not just contracts, vision too." I smiled, but there was something behind it. Something like ache. "It took me too long to learn that. But I hope you don't make the same mistake." We made our way to the far end of the warehouse, where a broken filing cabinet still leaned against the wall, half its drawers rusted shut. Ariana pulled out her notebook and sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping open a page filled with hand-sketched interface ideas and product flowcharts. Watching her reminded me of myself years ago, back when I thought control was selfish and silence was strength. I turned away and walked back to the wall, placing my hand on the diagram that mapped our first product lifecycle. My dad had drawn it on a Friday night, hands shaking from too much caffeine, eyes shining, as he explained the logic of user onboarding and cache accessibility. Back then, I didn't care about market share or valuations. I just wanted to build something that mattered. Something that helped people. I pressed my palm flat against the concrete. I didn't quit, Dad. I stayed even when they tried to erase me. And I'm still here. A breeze caught the corner of an old tarp near the window, fluttering dust into golden shafts of light. Outside, cars passed by, unaware of the history held inside these walls. Ariana looked up from her notes. "You're not staying in the city, number. My story's not here anymore. But yours might be." She gave a small nod, the weight of it understood without explanation. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a framed photo. It was me and Harold, taken the day we signed our first prototype patent. We were laughing, cheeks smudged with dirt, standing in front of this very door. I set it gently on the shelf by the window. Let the next chapter start here, not with vengeance, not even with closure, but with legacy, real legacy, the kind no one can vote you out of. The door opened with a creak that echoed into stillness. No plaque, no receptionist. Just a plain room with bare white walls and a faint smell of fresh paint. One long table sat in the center, empty except for a notebook and a ceramic mug someone had left behind, probably from whoever painted the trim. Ethan stepped in first, glancing around with a quiet kind of curiosity. "This it?" he asked. I nodded, stepping past him into the space. My boots tapped lightly on the hardwood floor, each sound sharp in the quiet. "It doesn't look like much now," I said. "But it will." He set his bag down, then turned to face me. There was no skepticism in his expression, only patience. Support. He had stood beside me in courtrooms and conference rooms. This, in comparison, was sacred ground. I pulled out the keys I'd gotten the day before and dropped them into a drawer on the side cabinet. I wouldn't be locking anything anymore. No more secrets. No more vaults. From my backpack, I took out the envelope I'd carried across every flight, every courtroom, Harold's original share certificate, now stamped and legally recorded. I laid it on the desk with quiet finality. Next to it, I placed a single sheet of paper with the title written in bold: First Light Fund Founding Charter. The concept had kept me awake for nights on end. A startup incubator and investment firm designed not for trend chasers or quick-turn unicorn hunters, but for women like Ariana. Women like me. Founders who were technical and tired, who knew what it meant to sign NDAs they never wanted, sit through meetings where their own title was forgotten. Women who built and were erased. No family influence, no shadow boards. No patriarchal advisors with firm handshakes, and no listening skills. Just capital, equity, protection, and something most women never got at the beginning of their careers: exit plans they designed for themselves. Ethan pulled up a chair beside me as I opened my laptop and began typing. Proposal 1. Pre-seed evaluation criteria: prioritizing founders with existing MVP, clear mission alignment, and lack of institutional access. Advisory board structure to be composed entirely of founders, not financiers. I typed steadily, not stopping until 3 full pages had formed. "What's your mission statement?" Ethan asked. I paused, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. "It's not about mission this time, it's about a mirror. I want women to see themselves fully in the companies they build from day one to exit, and never have to wonder if they were temporary." He nodded slowly, taking it in. I opened a new tab and began building a pitch deck, not for investors, but for myself. To remind me who I was doing this for. I pasted images of the old warehouse. The blueprints Dad sketched. A photo of the first roundtable meeting I held with interns in folding chairs. The screen lit with the glow of past and future merging. Later that evening, we sat on the floor beside the big table, pizza box between us, laughter soft but honest. It had been a long time since I'd eaten without stress tying a knot in my stomach. "You know what's funny?" I said, chewing thoughtfully. "They thought erasing me would be the end of the story. They didn't realize," Ethan replied, "that it was just the end of their chapter. We didn't toast. We didn't make promises. We just finished our food and sat in the silence that followed." I stood, stretched, and walked to the wall near the window. The light was low, now golden against the exposed beams. I picked up a marker and wrote directly on the drywall. "This is not the comeback. This is the beginning." The words were messy, the letters uneven. But they were mine. The next morning, I woke early. Ethan was still asleep on the old leather couch we'd dragged in from the thrift store down the block. I brewed coffee in a tin French press, then opened my laptop again. Inbox: 67 new messages. Ariana, 3 more female founders I'd once mentored. 2 journalists. Someone from a college entrepreneurship group asking if I'd speak. A message from a former Brightcap engineer. I didn't click them all. I just scanned the subject lines. "Thank you, your story is ours. Do we have rights too?" And one from a name I didn't recognize, Oliver. The subject line read simply, "They took everything." Where do I start? I clicked it open and began to read. When I finished, I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment. Then I opened my own social page and began to type. "We all build something, an idea, a team, a dream, only to watch it be questioned, stolen, or stripped of our name. Some of us get written out quietly. Others are told to be grateful for the scraps. But here's what I've learned. No one can take your voice unless you hand it to them. And if you've been erased, if you've ever seen your name disappear from something you gave your soul to, I want to hear from you. Tell me your story." I read every one. Then I hit post, and I waited. Not for validation. Not for revenge. Just for the next voice to rise.